A fascinating mystery lies within the pages of ancient texts and scriptures: the Nephilim Giants. These powerful warriors roamed the earth before and during the Great Flood and have sparked curiosity and discussions for generations. How tall were these giants? Did the Nephilim Giants truly walk the earth, or were the ancient storytellers just exaggerating their size? Join us as we solve the mystery surrounding the origin, height, and role of Nephilim Giants and uncover shocking new information about these biblical beings. One of the most well-known sources about Nephilim is the Book of Enoch. According to both Enoch and the Old Testament, fallen angels and human women gave birth to the Nephilim. This accounts for their otherworldly characteristics, particularly their amazing height. As we explore further, things become more complex. In Michael Heiser's book, A Companion to the Book of Enoch, he explores the various translations of this ancient text. The Greek texts refer to the Nephilim as standing 3,000 cubits tall in chapter 72. The regular Hebrew cubit, which is around 18 inches, would put them at an astounding 4,500 feet in height. They were taller than the world's tallest structure, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. According to the Ethiopian translation of the Book of Enoch, the Nephilim people stood 300 cubits tall. Although this is still a massive height, it is considerably lower than the 3,000 cubits mentioned in the Greek version. This discrepancy begs the question of possible missing elements or translation mistakes. The ancient copies of the Book of Enoch aren't always complete, which makes them difficult to interpret. Many researchers lean toward the more realistic height of 300 cubits, or about 450 feet. To put that in context, the tallest dinosaur ever discovered, Sauropodon, stood just 56 feet tall. If the Nephilim had lived, they would have been 8 times taller. If the Nephilim were real, why haven't we discovered any giant skeletons? Many scholars believe that the Nephilim were mythological figures. It's possible that old writers exaggerated these individuals' incredible height for dramatic effect. It was usual for ancient writers to exaggerate the stature of their enemies in order to convey a sense of power and terror. Another hypothesis holds that there are differences in the translations of the Book of Enoch. The height of the Nephilim is often referenced in chapter 72 but is omitted in online references. Scholars believe that instead of defining their size, the giants described in the ancient Book of Enoch were 3 races, one of which was known as the Eludes. Some translators interpreted the text incorrectly because of the poor quality of old manuscripts. They misinterpreted the word elude as a Hebrew cubit, which caused them to become confused about the Nephilim's height. This mistake remained in many revisions of the Book of Enoch until 2004, when academic Nickelberry identified and fixed it. This indicates that the popular notion of the Nephilim's great height could just be an error. If the Book of Enoch doesn't specify their height, what other hints can we explore to uncover their actual size? Maybe we should look to another source. A second clue rests in the Old Testament. The character of Goliath, a Philistine warrior from Gath who appears in the book of 1 Samuel, holds potential significance in solving the puzzle of the Nephilim's height. Earlier research has demonstrated that the Nephilim lived both before and after the flood. It's possible that Goliath was one of their offspring. Biblical references support this theory. Joshua 11:22 states that the Anakim, who are giant-sized people, and Enoch's offspring, live in Gath. Notably, Moses' spies compared the Anakim to the Nephilim in Numbers 13:33, implying a close relationship between the two tribes. We can speculate that Goliath was most likely a descendant of the Nephilim because he was a Philistine from Gath, the land of the Anakim, based on this biblical evidence. Thus, knowing Goliath's height will provide crucial information regarding the true size of the Nephilim. In the Old Testament, 1 Samuel 17:4 mentions that Goliath stood at a height of 6 cubits and a handbreadth. This measurement is based on the Hebrew cubit, which is approximately 45 centimeters. Goliath's height would have been approximately 2.97 meters. This is a height that is beyond the ordinary human, and even surpasses the tallest individual ever recorded in modern history. The MTIC text, a Hebrew translation of the Old Testament from the Middle Ages, gives Goliath's height as 6 cubits and a handbreadth. As we go deeper into these ancient writings, the story takes unexpected turns that might provide insight into this towering giant. Surprisingly, an entirely different story is found in ancient biblical manuscripts. Yes, there is yet more to this tale of Goliath's height to discover when we examine other biblical sources. The Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls include the third biblical source, or the third clue. In contrast to the Masoretic text, the Dead Sea Scrolls, a vast collection of old biblical texts discovered in Qumran, Israel, provided a distinct story. The Septuagint, an early Greek translation of the Old Testament widely used by New Testament writers, records the same information in 1 Samuel 17:4. Goliath's height is described as 4 cubits and a handbreadth in both the Septuagint and the Dead Sea Scrolls. In conventional Jewish cubits, Goliath would have been roughly 7 feet tall. How is Goliath's height different from what the modern Bible says? Has the story of this giant evolved over the years? Some scholars suggest that Goliath was just one of the Jews who tended to exaggerate the height of the Nephilim. In fact, one text records his height as merely 5 cubits and a handbreadth, which is a much more modest figure than the commonly accepted one. It's probable that the scribe selected a figure between 4 and 6 cubits because he didn't know the exact number. Which figure do we believe? The majority of manuscripts describe Goliath's height as 4 or 6 cubits. Therefore, we can safely rule out 5 cubits as our first option. This brings us to a pivotal question. Should we believe the ancient manuscripts that describe Goliath's height as roughly 7 feet tall, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Septuagint? Or should we lean on the side of the Masoretic text, which says he stood 9 feet tall and is the foundation for most modern Bible translations? It's always better to start with the oldest manuscripts while studying the Bible because they can be like a treasure map that points us in the direction of the truth. By taking this route, we can determine that Goliath was around 7 feet tall. Instead of imagining a massive giant, we could simply think of a very tall man. What do you think? Was he a legendary giant or merely a tall person? Considering the average height of an Israelite at the period was roughly 5.5 feet, Goliath was still a giant at 7 feet. Leading Jewish historian Josephus confirmed this measurement, casting doubt on the Masoretic text's description of Josephus's height of 6 cubits and a handbreadth. But this doesn't take away from Goliath's power or impressiveness in the biblical story. On the other hand, it shows that Goliath was still a formidable fighter despite his smaller stature. The story of his battle with David remains one of the most well-known examples of bravery and faith in God. Dr. Clyde E. Billington's study, Goliath and the Migrating Giants, How Tall Were They?, centers on an important and controversial detail: the differences in cubit measurements among ancient civilizations. Since many cultures utilized cubits of different lengths, there was no standard cubit. Hence, it was difficult to determine Goliath's exact height, just as the original foot measurement depended on King Henry VII's foot rather than being fixed. The variation in human body sizes further complicates this issue. Therefore, using a precise cubit value to compute Goliath's height may lead to incorrect results. Goliath's height can vary significantly based on who measured him, so relying on a specific cubit value may not produce reliable results. Dr. Billington asserts that biblical scholars are misguided in thinking that 1 cubit is equal to 18 inches. He recommends that modern Bible translations remove this footnote to prevent confusion. One intriguing theory is that David, the man who defeated Goliath, took the measurement. David's cubit would have been smaller than that of a larger man if he had been the typical height of an Israelite at that time. This would account for the difference in Goliath's height between the Masoretic text and other translations. Dr. Billington assumes that David, the man who fought and measured Goliath, was of the same height. His cubit would therefore be roughly 16.5 inches. Compared to this, Goliath, who the Septuagint describes as standing 4 cubits and a handbreadth tall, would appear to be a powerful fighter. If we apply the same conversion, we find that Goliath stands at a height of 2.74 meters. The fact that Goliath is only marginally taller than the highest human ever listed in the Guinness Book of World Records is astounding. That individual is Robert Wadlow, who measures an impressive 2.72 meters in height. Billington also relied on records of the armor that Goliath wore. He backed up his assertions with his understanding of the Philistines. According to Billington's theory, Goliath's armor was so heavy that only very tall men could move in it. No warrior would normally wear armor that hindered their movement. However, The Origin of Evil Spirits by Archie T. Wright offers an alternative viewpoint. The story revolves around a man who becomes possessed by a demon. Despite his average stature, he possesses extraordinary strength that enables him to break free from his bonds. The ancient Hebrews thought that demons were the spirits of the Nephilim, these giants who roamed the earth in search of new bodies when they died. Their souls were half angel, half human. This implies that Goliath's soul may have entered someone else after his death, giving them extraordinary strength. It is true that one ancient Egyptian document mentioned giants and their distinct units of measurement. Egyptian literature, especially the Nephilim Chronicles, refers to the Israelites and the Anakim, who are the offspring of the Nephilim, as Canaanites. These writings depict beings with unusual faces, standing 4 or 5 cubits tall. Egyptologist Charles A. Ring points out that, in contrast to the sometimes incorrect Hebrew cubit, the expression "from nose to toe" in inscriptions denotes a person's overall height. The term Nephilim, often translated as fallen ones, refers to the moral decay of the human race before the Great Flood. This subject connects to the legend of the Titans and Norse giants, reflecting a modern spiritual decline characterized by increasing evil and disorder, similar to the pre-flood era. As we chase our earthly goals, let's not forget the spiritual principles, just as Noah did when he anticipated the coming judgment. There could be disastrous consequences if you ignore these warnings.